The docking bay on Helix Station thrummed with the controlled chaos of shift change, dozens of ships being serviced simultaneously, cargo containers moving on automated tracks, crews rotating through in overlapping waves that created constant background activity. Perfect conditions for someone who knew how to move through crowds without being noticed. Kessa was Valryn, a species known for quick reflexes and natural agility, and unfortunately for her current reputation, for producing some of the sector's most skilled thieves. Not all Valryn were criminals, but enough followed that path that the stereotype carried weight that made legitimate work difficult for those who tried. Kessa had stopped trying years ago. She'd embraced what her species' reputation suggested she should be good at, and she'd gotten very good at it indeed. She'd been watching the Nightingale for 3 days now, a mid-sized, independent cargo hauler, well-maintained, with recent upgrades to engines and navigation systems that made her valuable on the resale market. Currently sitting in dock, while most of her crew were station-side, dealing with customs inspections for their last cargo run. The ship had skeleton crew aboard. Standard procedure was to leave maybe 2 people maintaining systems, while the rest handled administrative work that required physical presence at customs offices. That was exactly the vulnerability Kessa had been waiting for. She moved through the docking bay with practiced ease. Not rushing drew attention from security monitoring crowd patterns. Not hesitating, hesitation looked suspicious, like someone uncertain about where they belonged. Just walking with the purposeful stride of someone who had every right to be exactly where they were, carrying falsified maintenance authorization that would pass casual inspection, dressed in generic coveralls that could belong to any of the hundreds of service technicians working the bay. She boarded the Nightingale through the cargo access. The main airlock had security monitoring and crew verification protocols, but cargo access was usually just mechanical seals that could be overridden with the right tools and knowledge of standard cargo handling systems. Inside, she moved with efficient silence toward the bridge. Most ships this size had predictable layouts. She'd studied the Nightingale's class extensively during her 3 days of observation, knew where the bridge was, where the crew quarters were, where the critical systems were located. The skeleton crew was exactly where she expected, 1 person in engineering monitoring power distribution and life support, 1 person on the bridge running what looked like pre-flight diagnostics, but was probably just routine maintenance checks rather than actual preparation for departure. Kessa reached the bridge and drew a weapon, not lethal, just a stunner that would incapacitate the crew member for several hours without causing permanent damage. She was a thief, not a killer. The violence was professional necessity, not preference. The crew member on the bridge, a young Korathi woman who looked barely experienced enough to be qualified for her position, raised her hands immediately upon seeing the weapon. Smart response. No heroics, just professional recognition that resistance would be pointless and dangerous. Kessa gestured with the weapon toward the ladder descending to the cargo deck. Down to the cargo bay. Lie down, hands behind your head. You'll be unconscious for a few hours, but completely unharmed when you wake up. Don't make this complicated and I won't hurt you. The Korathi complied, moving carefully down the ladder while Kessa followed at safe distance, maintaining weapon coverage. Once the crew member reached the cargo bay and assumed the position Kessa had demanded, Kessa stunned her efficiently, 1 clean shot that would keep her unconscious and immobile for at least 4 hours. Then Kessa returned to the bridge and began the rapid sequence she'd performed many times before on different ships in different stations. Override the docking clamps that held the ship in its berth. Initialize engine systems that had been in standby mode. Plot emergency departure vector that would get her out of the station's controlled space before security could respond to the various alarms her theft would trigger. Prepare to execute the escape that would give her a ship she could sell for enough credits to operate independently for over a year. Her fingers moved across the controls with practiced ease. She'd done this before, clean, fast, gone before anyone could react effectively. The Nightingale's engines began spooling up, the distinctive vibration of systems coming online after being dormant. Dock lines snapped free from their moorings with mechanical thuds she could feel through the deck plating. She was 30 seconds from initiating departure thrust, the moment when she'd commit fully to the theft and have to execute the escape sequence flawlessly, when a voice cut through the ship's internal comm system. Kessa Vran'then, just her name, spoken by a human voice that was calm, measured, carrying no threat or command, just stating her name as simple fact. Kessa's hands hesitated, not dramatically, not stopping completely or pulling away from the controls. Just a fractional pause in the smooth sequence of movements she was executing with practiced precision. But that pause existed, and in it lay something she hadn't expected to encounter during what should have been a straightforward theft. Someone on the ship knew her real name. The human voice continued through the comm, still calm and carrying no edge of threat. "It's Ben Torres. I'm the Nightingale's navigator. I know you probably don't remember me specifically. We never actually spoke, but I remember you. 7 years ago, Meridian Station. You were running with a crew that had been hired to steal medical supplies from a warehouse my unit was guarding during the refugee crisis." Kessa's mind raced through memories she tried not to revisit. 7 years ago, Meridian Station, during that catastrophic period when 3 different regional conflicts had displaced hundreds of thousands of people, creating refugee populations that overwhelmed the station's capacity to provide basic services. She'd been younger then, less experienced, working for a crew that took contracts without asking too many questions about what they were stealing or who it would hurt. The job had been presented as simple commercial theft, in and out, no complications, good pay for a straightforward operation. But when they'd arrived at the warehouse and she'd scouted the location, she'd realized the truth. They were being paid to steal medical supplies that were desperately needed by refugee populations who had literally nothing else. The supplies weren't commercial inventory that could be replaced through normal supply chains. They were emergency humanitarian aid. She'd told her crew leader they needed to abort, that she wouldn't participate in stealing from refugees, that whoever hired them had either lied about what they were stealing or didn't care about the consequences. Her crew leader had disagreed, said a contract was a contract, that their reputation depended on completing jobs regardless of ethical complications, that whoever had hired them didn't care about refugee welfare, and neither should they. She'd threatened to alert the security forces guarding the warehouse if he proceeded with the theft. They'd had a tense standoff in the warehouse shadows, weapons drawn, calculating whether completing the job was worth the internal conflict it would create. Eventually, her crew leader had decided it wasn't. They'd aborted the operation, and Kessa had left the crew immediately afterward, burning bridges with people who'd considered her valuable team member right up until she'd let conscience interfere with professional protocols. But she'd never known whether the security forces guarding that warehouse had realized how close they'd come to a theft, or whether anyone had noticed that her crew had been present and had left without taking anything. "You probably saved lives that night," the human voice, Ben Torres, continued through the comm. "Those medical supplies went to refugee populations who desperately needed them. My unit never knew exactly why your crew aborted the operation, but I was watching from concealment in the warehouse. Saw you arguing with your crew leader in the shadows. Saw you refuse to participate in the theft once you understood what you'd actually be stealing. Saw you make a choice that cost you your position with that crew and probably cost you significant credits. I've remembered your name since then," Torres said. "Kessa Vran'then, the Valryn thief who had enough conscience to walk away from a payday when she realized what the theft would actually cost people who couldn't afford the loss." Kessa sat at the Nightingale's controls, engines spooled and ready, hands hovering over the final commands that would initiate her departure and complete the theft she'd spent 3 days planning. She could still do it. Could ignore this human who apparently remembered her from 7 years ago and execute the escape she'd calculated so carefully. But Torres had called her name. Her real name, not whatever false identity she'd been operating under recently. Spoken it with the weight of memory and recognition that stripped away 7 years of distance and professional detachment. "Why are you on this ship?" Kessa asked through the comm, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm the Nightingale's navigator," Torres responded. "Been with this crew for 4 years now. I was in engineering running maintenance checks when you came aboard. Recognized you immediately. You look essentially the same as you did 7 years ago, just older and probably much better at what you do. You could have alerted station security," Kessa said. "Could have stopped me before I reached the bridge or stunned your crew member. I could have, Torres agreed. But I wanted to see if you'd remember that you're capable of making choices that aren't just about professional success. That you've walked away from profitable work before when you realized it would hurt people who didn't deserve it. Kessa processed this. Her hands remained on the controls, engines humming with readiness, departure vector plotted and waiting for her final command. The Nightingale isn't carrying medical supplies for refugees, she pointed out. We're an independent cargo hauler, Torres said. We take contracts from whoever pays fair rates, same as you probably work for whoever hires you for theft operations. But we're not hurting anyone. We're just trying to make a living in a sector where that's getting harder every year for independents competing against corporate fleets. You steal this ship, he continued. You're not stealing from some massive corporation that can absorb the loss. You're stealing the livelihood of 12 people who depend on the Nightingale for their income and their home. Captain Reeves has been running this ship for 20 years. Chief Engineer Moss has a family on Corinth Station who depend on her salary. Our cargo handler just got out of medical debt after 3 years of payments. You're trying to guilt me into aborting, Kessa said. I'm reminding you that you're capable of recognizing when a job hurts people who don't deserve it, Torres corrected. That you're not just a thief executing professional protocols without thinking about consequences. That you're someone who made a different choice once when it mattered, and that person is still part of who you are. The silence extended. Kessa stared at the controls, at the commands that would complete her escape, at the credits this theft represented. At the memory of standing in a warehouse 7 years ago, refusing to steal from refugees, walking away from her crew, and the income that represented because some things mattered more than professional success. She'd tried to bury that memory, tried to become someone who didn't let conscience interfere with survival, tried to be the professional thief her species' reputation suggested she should be. But Torres had called her name, had remembered that moment when she'd chosen differently, had reminded her that she was once capable of conscience even when it was expensive. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 45 seconds, Kessa began the shutdown sequence, powered down the engines that had been spooled for departure, reset the docking clamps to secure position, canceled the emergency departure vector, secured all the systems she'd prepared to steal. Tor's voice came through the comm again. Thank you for remembering who you are. I'm leaving, Kessa said flatly. Before your crew member wakes up and station security starts investigating why your ship's engines briefly spooled during shift change. Understood, Torres said. The cargo access you used to board isn't monitored as closely as the main airlock. You can exit the same way you entered without drawing attention. Kessa stood from the pilot's chair and moved toward the exit, but paused at the bridge entrance. Why didn't you try to stop me physically? She asked. Why just talk? Because I remembered something else from 7 years ago, Torres said. After your crew aborted that theft and you walked away from them, I saw your face briefly in the warehouse security lights. You looked like someone who just paid a significant price for doing what you believed was right, and you weren't sure if it was worth it. I thought then that people like you, who are capable of conscience despite working in professions where conscience is expensive, those people deserve to be reminded occasionally that the choices they make matter. That someone notices when they choose principle over profit. This was your reminder, he concluded. 7 years delayed, but I remembered your name, remembered what you chose, and wanted you to remember it too before you made a different choice today. Kessa exited the Nightingale the same way she'd entered, through cargo access, moving with the purposeful stride that didn't draw security attention, blending into the shift change activity that filled the docking bay. Station security never realized how close the Nightingale had come to being stolen. The Korathi crew member woke up hours later with significant confusion about why she was lying on the cargo deck and a substantial headache from the stunner. But the ship was secure and nothing had been taken. But Kessa carried the memory of a human voice calling her name. Of Ben Torres remembering one choice she'd made 7 years ago and using that memory to interrupt the cleanest theft she'd planned in months. She didn't stop being a thief. That was still how she survived in a sector where legitimate work was difficult for Valryn with her reputation and background. But she started being more selective about her jobs, started asking more questions about who she was stealing from and who would be hurt by the theft. Started recognizing that the person who'd walked away from stealing medical supplies from refugees was still part of who she was, even after 7 years of professional operations, where she'd tried not to think about consequences beyond her own survival. Months later, she encountered Torres again by chance in a station market. They made eye contact across a crowd of shoppers. He nodded acknowledgement. She nodded back. No words exchanged, just recognition of the moment when he'd called her name, and she'd remembered she was capable of choosing conscience over credits. Against her better judgment, Kessa approached him. "You could have let me steal your ship," she said quietly. "Could have alerted security and had me arrested instead of just talking." "I could have," Torres agreed, "but I believe people are capable of being more than their professions require them to be. You proved that 7 years ago. I wanted to give you the chance to prove it again." "Why does it matter to you?" Kessa asked. "Because I was military for 12 years before I joined the Nightingale's crew," Torres said. "Spent significant portions of that time in situations where following orders meant hurting people who probably didn't deserve it. I know what it costs to choose conscience over duty, to recognize that some things matter more than following the professional protocols you've been taught. When I saw you at Meridian Station choosing to abort a theft that would have hurt refugees," he continued, "I recognized something I valued, someone capable of that kind of choice despite working in a profession where making it costs you significantly. That's worth remembering, worth reminding you about when I saw you about to make a different choice." "You think I'm better than I actually am," Kessa said. "I think you're capable of being better than your circumstances require," Torres corrected. "There's a significant difference. I'm not claiming you're some kind of hero. I'm saying you're capable of conscience, and that capacity is worth preserving even when it's expensive to exercise." Years later, when other thieves in certain circles asked Kessa about the job she'd aborted, because word spread about the Valryn thief who'd had the Nightingale ready to steal and had powered it down instead, she told them about a human who'd called her name. "I could have completed that theft," she'd explain. "Could have been gone before security responded effectively. Could have made enough from selling that ship to operate independently for over a year. But this human, Ben Torres, the Nightingale's navigator, he called my name. Didn't shout commands or threats, just spoke my name with the weight of memory from 7 years earlier when I'd made a different choice. Reminded me that I was once someone who walked away from profitable work because completing it would hurt people who didn't deserve it. That reminder interrupted the cleanest theft I'd planned in months," Kessa would say. "Made me remember that I'm capable of conscience even when it's expensive. That the person who chose principle over profit 7 years ago is still part of who I am beneath all the professional protocols I've learned. Human memory as leverage," she'd conclude. "More powerful than weapons or security systems or threats of arrest. Just one name, spoken with recognition of who you're capable of being, carrying enough weight to make you question whether the choice you're about to make is consistent with who you actually are." The story of the Nightingale. The ship that almost got stolen, but didn't because a human crew member called the